I just think it's shameful that poor folks in Humphreys County, Mississippi, have the highest audit rate, in America. But if you're, a high flyer or somebody running a shell company, you're not as likely to get audited.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you with us. You just heard that. And when most of us hear IRS, folks cringe. They fear the possibility of an audit looming. Just hate the idea, some people do, of paying taxes. So these poor women and men who work there can be so maligned, often portrayed as an evil force. So it's easy, starting with Obama and intensifying under Trump, to slash their budgets. The IRS now, this is the kicker, what Wyden was talking about on the brief piece you just saw, are auditing more poor people than wealthy people. Folks who get income tax credits because they make such little money are being audited at obscenely high rates. It's easier to audit them than the wealthy, they say. But what's really happening here between the budget cuts in the IRS, auditing the poor, and increasingly wealthy people getting away with financial murder? Bill Black, who is an associate professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, white-collar criminologist, former financial regulator, author of that wonderful book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One, and of course, a regular contributor here on Real News, I'm sure has a great deal to say about this. Bill, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
So when you read those headlines at first, and you see these headlines and read the stories in ProPublica and other places, Fox Business News, about the poor being the ones who are increasingly being audited, not the wealthy, not even people making $100,000 or $200,000 a year or $300,000 a year, but the poorest of the poor. What is really happening here?
So I teach public finance, and I was an enforcement director and litigation director for a federal agency. So when you do your audits, when you do your enforcement actions, you don't do them randomly. You prioritize the most serious ones, and you try to do it in a way that also will bring in the most funds from the people who have violated the law compared to the expenses. That's what we did in the savings and loan crisis. The IRS does the opposite. And it does the opposite not for random reasons, but because one party, the Republican Party, has decided it wants to encourage tax fraud by the wealthiest Americans. Right? So let's cut
can I
through
just stop you?
this.
Can I stop you? Let's really parse that out. What does that mean? Wants to allow rich folks to get away with tax fraud. What does that mean?
It means two things. One, when we do audits correctly, and when the IRS has lots of experience with this, lots of data on this, you prioritize the wealthiest people in using the kinds of deductions that are most problematic, that we have experience, are most likely to involve fraud. And when you prioritize audits in that way, you get back, in terms of bang for the buck. It isn't that you minimize losses. You bring in vastly more than it costs you to bring those enforcement actions. In other words, enforcing the law against the rich tax cheats is enormously profitable for the IRS. Therefore, and it's just one party, it's the Republican Party, have decided they're going to do two things. One, they're going to starve the IRS for resources. And two, they're going to direct the IRS to use its resources against poor people instead of the rich people. Even though when they do the audits of the poor people, they lose money, right? It costs more to do the audit than they're going to get the pittance they're going to get back from the poor people. And to pick up a point you made in the introduction, yes, the IRS has a bad reputation with the American people. Part of that's inherent, right? But most of it is that there have been a series of Republican hit jobs. And shamefully, the Clinton administration actually signed on to one of these hit jobs. Well, later, the Inspector General did a report and said, it's not true. this whole congressional investigation that tried to pillory the IRS as a bunch of devils incarnate and such, that was all BS. And the Clinton administration didn't push back, didn't defend its honest employees, jumped onto the Republican stuff. They changed the IRS a lot and gave the Republicans the excuse to remember their goal is to starve the beast, as they say at the federal government. And one of the ways is to, and in particular, of course, they do things primarily for the wealthy, which is their real base, not the racist base. But the wealthy are the ones who actually direct Trumpian policies and congressional policies. So that's what they've been doing, and they've been doing it for over a decade.
So I'm going to come back to it. I want to watch this clip for a moment. This is the head of the IRS talking to Wyden on the committee. This is part of his response. Let's watch for a moment.
My question is it really the intent of the Internal Revenue Service to audit taxpayers who are struggling to make ends meet while increasingly letting millionaires and multinational corporations off the hook?
No.
Is that the intent of the agency?
No.
What are you going to do about it?
We're looking at the earned income tax credit. The part of the problem with the statistics and where you are is there's an $18.4 billion overpayment each year associated with the earned income tax credit. We want to work with Congress. We're going back to see every proposal that's happened, I believe, since 1975 to reduce the complexity in the credit. The majority of the issues revolve around the definition of a qualifying child.
Look, this, in my view, the stark contrast between the fact that the poorest and most vulnerable get audited more than these multimillionaires is yet more hard evidence that the tax system is stacked in favor of the wealthy. I would like you to send us a plan, the chairman and myself, on how you're going to turn this around. Can we have that from you within, say, 30 days?
You will. I'd be willing to meet with you personally.
I'd like to have it in writing.
My views on not only the earned income tax credit, but we
over
are looking at higher end taxpayers as well.
I'm over my time. I'd like it within 30 days.
So what's reality here? I mean, one of the things that of course, basically they were saying it's easier to audit somebody poor than to spend all the money it would take to audit people who are wealthy and have people to defend them. I mean, so to talk about what this reality says, plus dealing with the fact that the numbers of people working in the IRS, as I said earlier, has gone down. They've whittled that agency away a bit. So how do those things interplay?
Not a bit. They have systematically hamstrung the agency to produce precisely this result of allowing the worst rich people. Now, remember, there are tons of very honest Americans who are wealthy, who pay their taxes. It's a minority, but it's a significant group of the wealthy that decide, hey, I'd like to be even wealthier, right? And the best way to do that is cheat. And they almost always have the benefit of tax attorneys and other accounting tax experts, right? In contrast, the earned income tax credit is our only significant tax program for the working poor, right? Indeed, it creates our closest thing we have to a negative income tax for a smaller group of people. The earned income tax credit, having had one of our kids file for it, is ludicrously complex, right? All because we're afraid that $12 might go to the so-called deserving poor. These are working people, right? They work full time and they get $15,000 a year or $12,000 a year and such, and we give them a tiny bit of money back in response to that. And we are so, oh my God, we must not have somebody get $12. And then we make a system so complex that nobody knows how to fill out the damn forms.
Right.
Right. It's really complex. And the people who do the earned income tax credit have no attorneys. They have no tax preparers, right? You can't make money off of these things because they're so poor. So it's just ridiculous. And of course, who are the world's experts on this? The IRS, right? So that head of IRS knows exactly what's going on. This is all a BS explanation. It has truth, right? Like any good BS story has. But he could turn the resources right now towards the wealthy. But this is the new Trump administration. Does anybody in the world expect the Trump IRS to go after wealthy tax cheats? I mean, the president is a wealthy tax cheat. His family is filled with wealthy tax cheats. Read the New York Times expose. I mean, dozens and dozens of pages they go through. This isn't a one-off. This is decades. This is their entire life. This is what they do. They cheat on taxes.
So
There is no way the IRS is going to crack down on tax cheaters in the most corrupt administration in the history of the United States.
I never thought talking about the IRS could be so much fun. But so let me close with
Well,
this.
how did Wyden keep a straight face and say, "I want a plan within 30 days"?
So I just want to close with this. Two things. I mean, I really want to talk. If you respond to the intersection of this idea and really explain it a bit in the short time we have left about how you assert that Republicans and maybe another allies of theirs constructed this system so that the rich could get away with murder in terms of money. And I want you, A, to talk a bit about what that means.
Sure.
And how that happened. And B, I mean, the cutting of the budget for the IRS has happened under everybody's administration, including Obama's, and got worse under Trump. But it's not just Republicans who did that.
No, again, Republicans led it, but the shame of the New Democrats, and the New Democrats include, of course, the Clintons,
Yes.
And President Obama went in front of the New Democrat coalition as soon as he was elected president and said, "I'm your guy. I'm a New Democrat." All right. So their thing is the government's the problem. They have bought into that fundamental Republican lie that the government is the problem and rich people are the solution. But even within that, there are huge differences, right? The Obama administration was not corrupt in this, capital C sense.
Right.
Yes, it went along with far too many things. And as we speak, Krugman has a column about the insanity of the Democratic so-called center, where it simply fails to come to grips with the fact that the Republican Party doesn't have any moral substance anymore. That it really isn't just a party for the rich, it's a party for the corrupt. And that's a major difference. And in criminology, this stuff has a term. It's called systems incapacity, where you deliberately make the system incapable of stopping the crimes, right? So that's exactly what they're doing. And they're not just doing it in the IRS. They have been doing it to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Future Trading Commission. And it's always the Republicans, right, in the House slashing the budgets. So that, for example, after the flash crash, which some people may remember, when the market you just absolutely tanked within literally 12 minutes, massively, as all these trading programs kicked in and fought off against each other, and somebody, at the beginning manipulated this whole process. At the end of it, the SEC and the CFTC said, "You know what? We don't have the computer capacity even after the fact to research and find what happened. We need, budget so that we can able to get into the 21st century on this type of stuff," right? And the House deliberately, at the insistence of the Republicans, refused to allow that to happen because they want us to be vulnerable to those kind of rich cheats. The rich cheats are their real base,
And the poor
not
people,
the folks with the MAGA hats.
and the poor people pay the price.
And all of us pay the price, but yes, they particularly love targeting the poor.
Well, Black, I have a ton of other questions. We're going to have to save it for another day, though. But I do want to. There's a lot to probe here. And I appreciate your work, your humor, and your insight. Thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you.
Always good to talk to you. And I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. Good to have you with us. Take care.
Hey y'all, my name is Tharna Noor and I'm a climate crisis reporter here at the Real News Network. This is a crucial moment for humanity and for the planet. So if you like what we do, please support us by subscribing at the link below. Thank you.